Today we're going to have an in-depth discussion with Jakecia, owner of Desired Designs in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And so Jakecia is going to share with us her experience, 10 years in the industry, working as a designer in her own company, and 6 years working also as a interior design program coordinator and adjunct instructor. And we're looking forward to learning all the information that she can help us with in running our own interior design business, or if we're new to the industry, how we can implement that in our own careers. So thanks, Jakecia. We're happy to have you. And
hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
Yes. So we want to get right into the questions. And anyone feel free to comment in the comment section. If you have a question at the end, we can answer them if the time permits. So we'll get right into the first question. But first, we want to talk a little bit about how has the pandemic, since that's the major thing that's been going on these last few months, how has the pandemic been affecting your business, and how have you been able to navigate things remotely as well?
So the pandemic has changed everything. I mean, everybody is very familiar with how it's changed our personal lives, how we work, how we operate, how people even view and see like the spaces that they're living in and that they're working in. And so the pandemic has changed so many facets of not only business, but our lives. So as far as like business, like work and projects, I haven't seen a complete absence of projects, which is great. I'm very blessed to say that. But just the type of projects that I'm working on, starting to do a lot more online design and online work, just because of social distancing and not being able to necessarily meet with people face to face, or not everybody being comfortable doing that. And also being flexible with how people want to work, the length of projects, flexible with contractors, and having to do some, site visits or walkthroughs via FaceTime, which is new for me. So all of those things are changing aspects for the interior design profession on my side. But it's one aspect from a client standpoint is also having to communicate more efficiently with the client, just because we're not seeing each other face to face, having to transfer information. We were talking about this earlier, but I recently had to add a client login portal so that we could be more efficient with how we communicate and what information is given, and being able to get that faster. So it's really interesting how technology becomes even more important. Even though we were very dependent on it before, we're almost like having to operate solely through it now. So really just having to update our website, our communications, really things that kind of I had not thought about or were on the back burner before have just become more pressing issues now. So I would say from that standpoint, the pandemic has changed business to become more dependent on versatility and technology and how we can use it and adapt with it. But also the projects that people are wanting to do. So I've gotten a lot more residential inquiries of, I'm working at home now. How do I make my office and, my kitchen space work together? How do I make a makeshift office? Like, what are things I can do to make my house more efficient? People weren't in their houses as much before, but now that they're forced to be in them a lot more, they're seeing and addressing the issues that they kind of left on the back burner before. So just being more aware of the space that they're living in has drawn clients to say, hey, I really need help with this. Or from my commercial clients, reopening. What does that look like? We had a lot of time where they weren't able to be open. And a salon that I've been working with was, hired me during the pandemic to say, hey, I want to make some changes while we are closed. How do we do this? What does it look like to have a more efficient space. And when we're able to come back from this, I can open and make sure, you know, people feel safe, my customers feel safe, and also have kind of made good use of the time that we had to close. So we did, you know, some minor renovations and things like that, and we're continuing to do that right now. But the pandemic has changed so many facets of things, not just business, but, you know, how people view space and are going to use it now.
Right. And I actually wanted to talk a little more about that too. How do you think the industry is going to change moving forward from this?
I think that it's going to really make people more aware, more conscientious of how designers are. Their key role is to really design for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Even if it's your house, you still have people in your home. In order to be hospitable, you have to make sure your home is prepared for people to be in it. So I think it's just making people more conscientious about what we're doing, and it not being just kind of like the aesthetics, or, you know, people would consider it fluff sometimes, but I just think it's making what we were already doing more important and putting a target on that specific aspect of our job, you know, the health, safety, and welfare of the people we're designing for, and making sure that becomes as equally important as the aesthetics.
Right, right. I agree. So to kind of rewind and get some experience from your experience in terms of how you started your company in the beginning, if you can remember far back how you started and what makes, yeah, it's been a while. So do you remember what motivated you to be like, okay, I'm going to open my company, I'm going to be working for myself as an interior designer?
Um, well, when I first opened my company, it was 2009. So it was the year after my oldest daughter was born. And having children really changed how I saw myself in the industry. So prior to that, I had a lot more flexibility. I could work at a firm 80 hours a week, 60 hours a week, and it not be a big, you know, a big deal. But my lifestyle really started craving more of the flexibility that I needed in order to have a healthy work-life balance. And I know that's kind of like a cliche, you know, saying or whatnot, but it really was important to me just because my life was shifting, but I didn't want to put down design. I really love my job. I love what I do. I love the space planning aspect of it. And that wasn't something that I just wanted to kind of put on hold. So I was really looking for ways to be flexible. And during 2009, it was becoming very difficult because that's right when the economy like tanked. So
Right.
it was right after we kind of had, you know, an economic crisis in the US. So, you know, I was working for an architecture firm, and actually got laid off from that job right after my maternity leave. And so it was kind of like an opportunity for me to dive into that. And so I took the dive. I still worked part-time doing sales. So I was able to still have flexibility of when I was on the floor and things like that. But it just, the versatility of needing to have more of a balance and not just kind of grinding all the time was really the initial thing that kind of helped me to open the business. And I slowly was able to transition into being full-time in my own business after, I don't know, almost 10 years of doing it part-time. So,
Wow.
you know, I didn't quit my full-time job until 2017. So
Wow.
is going on my second year of being full-time design in for my own business. So there was a lot of transition from opening until now.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of times designers think, you know, once they're on their own, they can just do cold turkey from company to, and I've even thought that, like, because it was never really in my plan to be a design business owner. You know, I always thought I'd work for someone. So you just
Yeah,
automatically think, oh, well, then I'm just going to work for myself. And
exactly.
so I like that you brought out how it was a progressive thing where, you know, you progressively got to being full time. And I mean, it's a wise way to do things, especially when you have responsibilities. So,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah, it was challenging because with me and my husband starting our family and having children, we needed to be able to continue to work, but being able, like I said before, to have a healthy work-life balance. It wasn't something that I just wanted to kind of put down. So after I left sales, I actually started teaching
Mhm.
and went into education, but was still able to practice part-time while I was doing
Mhm.
that. So that was nice. I never have been one of those people who, I loved teaching, but I never wanted to just teach and be so out of sorts with what was going
Mhm.
on in the real world.
Mhm.
So it was nice to be able to still keep Desired Designs afloat and um, work and do actual practice while teaching. So that helped as
Mhm. Right. And that's how I met you. I wouldn't have known you had you
well.
not taught. So that was a while ago, 2012. I think we
I
met.
know.
So
It seems like forever.
yeah.
But yeah, it was nice being able to teach and just kind of see how the practical part of what you're learning can apply to students, because we worked in a community college, and it's very different than a university where a lot of things
Mhm.
are more theoretical.
Mhm.
And you have to really, I feel like, equip students practically to be able to practice when they leave. So it was really important to me while I was teaching to not only prepare people in theory, but to actually prepare them practically for what they were doing in the real world.
Right, right. And that's one of the questions we'll circle back to as well. So the next one is, so what do you attribute the success of your business? So I think one of the things you mentioned, being progressive as you transition, that of course makes a difference. So, but do you think there was anything else that helped your business to where it's become?
Just building relationships along the way. I think one of the things that was frustrating to me initially as a business owner was you kind of have that naivety of, I'm going to just jump in and it's all going to piece together.
Mhm.
But really, the journey along the way, meeting people, developing relationships with people, all of those things I think have over the long term benefited the business and helped me to grow the business. So even people that I would meet who are not clients but would eventually refer me to someone, or would become a design mentor, someone that I would ask, when I had really tough situations with clients, like, what do I do? How do I maneuver this? When someone like leaves you hanging with a bill, like you don't have anybody to like say, hey, you
Right.
owe me this money. Like, how are you dealing with that? Like, those are the kind of things that I think relationships really become imperative and important to make sure that you are connected to people, even if they're not directly quote unquote clients. So
Mhm. Mhm.
even trades or vendor people, because the industry
Mhm.
is so small, like there's people who have worked in showrooms before, and then they'll be at a design firm 2 years later, and then 3 years down the road, you might be working with them. So those are things that like people circulate into the design industry. It's really not huge. And I think just developing relationships with
Mhm.
people has been one of the main benefactors of my business.
I agree. And so that leads us to, how did you meet your first client? Was it a friend or someone you knew?
My
Or
very first
mhm.
client was someone that I went to church with.
Mhm.
She was a real estate agent, and she would refer me to clients.
Mhm.
And because this is when I was in sales at the time,
Mhm.
so I was an assistant manager at a tile showroom, and so I would get clients coming in all the time, and I would do small residential work and stuff on the side. But she was a realtor, and she would refer people to me when they were moving into houses. And so the first couple of jobs I did were her referrals, but
Mhm.
I also did projects in her house too. So
Mhm.
she was kind of like my first connection to like
Mhm.
references and people in the industry. So,
Mhm.
and she's still an amazing supporter. And, you know, just a couple of days ago, I texted her and I was like, who does your photographs? Because I was having a hard time
Mhm.
finding somebody who would do, you know, several rooms and photo shoot them for me. And she
Mhm.
got
Mhm.
me her contact. So
Mhm.
she's been a great client and also a mentor too. So
Awesome. So, how would you say you're finding clients nowadays the most? Is it mostly referrals, or are you feeling like you still need to market quite a bit for new clients?
I think most of it is word of mouth now.
Mhm.
But now with the pandemic and everything, it's been I've been kind of rethinking how to pursue clients and
Mhm.
to bring in and generate income. So now you know, we were talking before previously, I just released an online design aspect of the business. And so it will be new to me, marketing it.
Mhm.
Done online design before, but just, you know, making it more accessible for people, because I realized that it might not be right now, but down the road, because
Right.
life is shifting and changing, how people are perceiving connections with other people, that might be something that I need to be more integral in my business.
Mhm.
So just
Mhm.
thinking about stuff down the road, that's something that I just am thinking about a little bit more differently these days. So
Yeah, I mean, it's timely, and I think that's what a lot of designers have been thinking about lately. And so, currently, do you have like a system of how you gather your leads, or how you pursue your leads, and trying to get them to be convert to clients, or you kind of just let it organically happen?
yeah, at this point in the game, it's more organic
Hmm.
versus specifically strategic. But I'm
Hmm.
getting to the point where I'm starting to be more strategic, if that makes sense. Just
Hmm.
because you get the referrals and you know they're always going to come in, but with wanting to grow the business and possibly bring on someone else, I have to be more strategic in making sure um, we're constantly staying in front of people. So one of the things that I'm working on for this year is developing my mail list and getting a
Hmm.
subscriber list that I've never done before.
Right.
And it's just, you know, occasionally sending out emails, staying in
Hmm.
front of people is was
Hmm.
one of my goals. And so I think by doing that, it's slowly getting to the point where I'm being more strategic about um,
Hmm.
retaining clients and getting in front of new clients.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, what do you think would make your client an ideal client for where you are at this point? Has it changed your ideal client, or do you feel like it's still the same?
Well, my ideal client is, since I love commercial design, I really enjoy working with small business owners. That's like my
Mhm.
ideal client and what I'd ideally like to be my bread and butter.
Mhm.
Um, the pandemic has changed that a little bit just because people are not um, opening up new businesses as readily now, just because of everything that's going on.
Right.
But um, in trying to transition into that fully, getting the commercial client to trust is a little bit more challenging than a
Mhm.
residential client. Like, people are willing to take a risk on their living room versus like their whole entire business, which they've invested their life into, is typically not as easy. So I think people are willing to trust a more established um, firm
Mhm.
versus someone who is independent. So just getting to the point where I will be able to do that and you know, look more legitimate in the business owner's eyes, because
Right.
they don't know everything that we know. Um,
Mhm.
it's just something you have to gradually work towards. It's not achieved overnight.
Right.
So in the meantime, working in in the residential sector, I do both. So
Mhm.
that was one thing that kind of threw me off initially as a business owner, was not always getting my dream client, my target
Mhm.
client, and being okay with that, you know?
Mhm.
Because at first you're like, I'm not even doing what I want to
Right.
do. But you have to realize that doesn't come overnight. Like, you sometimes you have to do projects that are not like you're head over heels about. So
Mhm.
it's just interesting having to kind of change your mindset and perspective.
Right, right. No, it's such a good point. And so, since you have a background in visual communications, how do you think that's given you an edge in terms of your projects or how you're able to present your designs to the customers?
I think as far as like my commercial clients, it gives me more appeal, just
Hmm.
because a lot of times with commercial clients, they're working with the whole brand of their space. So whether it's retail or office or whatnot, my visual communication background allows me to integrate branding and how people are going to buy into the space and all of that. So it's really helped more on the commercial side and
Hmm.
making sure that clients feel comfortable that we're not just going to be selecting pretty fixtures, but we're going to actually be integrating your brand into how we design your space.
Right, right. That would definitely be important to them. And so, going back a little bit to what you were mentioning before about the commercial client being a little bit more difficult to gain their trust and build the rapport with them. So, do you think that a designer should be looking to network more so with them or putting themselves in front of where they, I guess, hang out or where they are to try to, find those type of jobs by building relationships with them? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one for me
Mhm.
because I think within the last 2 years, that has been a shift for me. So
Mhm.
originally, my networking was like, oh, I'm going to go to ASID events, I'm going to
Right.
go to IDA events, and that's networking for me.
Mhm.
And then once you realize that's not who my consumer is,
Right.
it just shifts how you network. So
Mhm.
now a lot of times I'll go to small business conventions. I
Mhm.
will go to, you know, realtor convention. I go to like different aspects where
Mhm.
people are actually going to use my service are
Mhm.
going to be. And that
Right.
has helped a lot. So just
Mhm.
reshaping how I view networking. You're not always going to be in a room full of designers and you don't want to be. You know what I mean?
No.
You want to be in a room where people are going to need your services and understand that. And so for at first that wasn't comfortable for me because people didn't speak my language and I didn't understand, why am I here? I have no place here. But no, you're trying to sell what they need. So small business owners, realtors, you know, a home builders association, I would go to
Right.
like their events, contractors, developing relations with them because you always need a contractor. You always need
Mhm.
someone who's going to do the work, and they refer you to people as well. So that's where I started networking more and really developing relationships outside of where I was comfortable.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so, let's go back to the teaching aspect again. And so, one of the things I was thinking about, how would you encourage a student coming out just recently graduating or who are very close to graduating? What advice do you think you'd give them if they're entering the industry for the first
If a student is entering the industry now, my main advice would be get all the experience you can get. A lot of times we think if we can't land the dream job at the dream firm, if we can't land, the dream client, then it's not worth pursuing. But everything that I've done in the industry has benefited me in some way. Even when I
time?
was in sales and I wasn't necessarily doing my dream quote unquote job, I learned a lot in sales. I learned how to deal
Mhm.
with people. I learned how to sell the product. And a lot of times people are great at design, but they can't sell their designs. And so
Mhm.
I think getting being very versatile in your experiences in the design industry is so imperative, and it really gives you that edge that you need, especially if you want to be a business owner,
Mhm.
that you don't necessarily get that education in school. So it's very helpful to get experience in sales, get experience in a large firm because you know how they operate and function, and it tends to be more, cut and dry. You do this, you do that, and you really learn the ins and outs of how a firm works
Mm-hmm.
versus working with a smaller firm where you touch a little bit of everything and you get more exposure in that way. So I've worked for all of them, a small firm,
Mm-hmm.
a large firm. I've worked on the showroom floor, and I've taught. So all of those experiences give you a different part of the design industry that you can utilize in practice, especially if you want to own your own firm.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned with the showroom, and because I recall like being in design school, and majority were always like, oh, I'm going to work in a design company, and I like they wouldn't consider working in another space like that. And so it's like, it really brings you the awareness of, if you want to be a business owner, there's so much that you can learn. And I feel like even myself, I'm lacking in that department of being more I guess it has to do with shyness, but when you're in a showroom environment, you can't like you can't hide, you can't be in a shell.
Especially if you want to eat. Sure.
So
The showroom I was in, a lot of them you just get paid as a base pay and then
right.
commissions on top. And the showroom I was in was all commission. So
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't go and you weren't aggressive on the floor, then you weren't going to eat. So it made me very, even if people are going to say no, you never know. Like, one of the key things that I learned on a showroom floor that's really imperative is the sale might not happen today, but it could happen 6 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's people I would talk to and they'd be like, oh, I'm just looking. But if you educate them, like, this would be great, this is a great
Mm-hmm.
option. If they feel comfortable with you 6 months down the line, they would come back and say, hey, do you remember me?
Mm-hmm.
Automatically, it's a sale that you hadn't worked for or hadn't expected.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's one of the things that I learned is, like, a no might be a no, but it could be a no and then a yes later.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been very beneficial as an entrepreneur, because you're not always going to get the sale right now. Like, you have to plant the seed, and a lot of times people have to trust you and see
Mm-hmm.
that she really knows what she's talking about, or see your projects or see your progress. But that could end up being a client later. So
Mm-hmm.
it's never a waste. Sometimes people think especially in sales, you're like, well, that was a waste of my time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not always so. So being on the showroom floor is definitely more beneficial than people think.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome experience. And so, talking about being a solo designer in your business, what do you think is the main challenge that you think you deal with, and how do you try to mitigate the challenges?
I think the main challenge for me as a solo designer is getting the feedback I need. So that's why having a design community is really important to me. People that I can shoot drawings and be like, can you look at this? I've been looking at it way too long and I need to make sure that this works. Or mentors who are in the design industry and have really develop relationships with me to the point where I feel comfortable, like, I don't know what to do for this, can you help me? Those are things that I struggle with the most now as being a solo entrepreneur. Versus in a firm, you just have people to bounce off ideas, and that collaboration is just naturally there. And when you go from a firm to being solo, it's hard because you aren't collaborative. You get your ideas, your best ideas, from a group. It's collective. So I try to maintain a community still, so that I still have that, and being able to tap into that so that my ideas are not stagnant and just kind of circling only through my head.
Yeah, that definitely is one of the challenges. And so, when you have a problem that comes up in the design process, then so specifically, how do you try to navigate a situation to still remain in control of the situation without letting it overwhelm you? Is there like an example of a situation where you were able to contain it before it made you feel like it's out of control?
Well, as far as like out in the field with a client, usually those situations, I'm very blunt and honest with the client, like, especially if there's an issue that's come out up on site or something's gone wrong, which
Mhm.
it always happens.
Mhm.
I usually step back and say, you know what, let me think about it for a second. Let me evaluate this, and we'll get back to you. Or if it's something that needs to be dealt with now, then I'll try to drag in and pull in everyone who is imperative in that situation. So the contractor, the client, and we just talk it out. Like, what needs to happen? What is everyone's thoughts? How does this work? Because communication is really important. Early on in design, I hated conflict. I was like, please, no, I'd rather go
Mhm.
sit and do drawings.
Mhm.
But it's so important being an entrepreneur that you're able to, even if it's an uncomfortable situation, say, you know what? Okay, let's just put it out here. What's going to happen? And
Mhm.
the worst case scenario is like you lose a client or the situation just goes bad. But I found that a lot of times, if you're very honest, um, the client is will receive that better. So you
Mhm.
can say, you know what, if you messed up, you messed up. I messed up.
Mhm.
Or, you know, this situation didn't go like I thought it was. I apologize. We'll try to do better. But
Mhm.
you know, it's better instead of ducking it and hiding it, or, you know, trying to
Mhm.
work around it. Um, I think just being open and honest about what's happening to a degree where the client can understand and take it, um, typically works better.
I totally agree. And even, you know, how like if there's an issue and it might even be an email, like not waiting to reply to that email, at least say, I got your email,
Yeah,
I'll work on it. Even if you
yeah,
just communicate that I received it, I'm working on it, and
yeah,
not just wait till you have the answer, then
yeah.
it could put them at ease and even
Right.
yourself at ease.
I'm getting better at that. I'm getting better at that because it'll be stirring in my head, and they're like, "Did you get my email?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm sorry, I did get your email. I'm working on it. I'll get back to you."
Right, because
So it's
that will
one of those
stress me
things you
out.
have to continually do it. Yeah.
Right. Oh, so what has your experience working with architects been like? And what would you say is the way to make that relationship better? I know in my past I've had interesting relationships with architects before, and even at times where I might get the impression that like they don't respect my role as a designer sometimes, and I'm like, I know what I'm doing, okay? So how has it been for you?
I think architects are a challenge because typically they're very similar to us.
Hmm.
They want to not necessarily control what's going on, but they want to be able to have a very weighty say, right? And so we're the same way, you know what I mean? Like, especially if we feel like these solutions are going to work best for a client. I try to just try to go into those relationships with a very open mind. Like, you know what they're saying could work.
Hmm.
Let me evaluate it. Let me look at it. Let me take a look at it. And if not, I come back and say, well, you know, I looked at what you did, and from this standpoint, I think this might work better. You know what I mean? So just trying to be respectful of everyone involved, because I know that when you typically try to see it from the other person's standpoint, it's a little bit easier versus just saying, you know, this works and this is what the client wants. So I think just being respectful, that everyone's investing their time and thought into this, but also learning to be able to just take it with a grain of salt. Like, you know,
Hmm.
it's something that's learned over time. It's not
Right.
easy because you work on these projects so long and so hard that you just take ownership, and it's hard to separate that. So
Hmm. Hmm. And so I'd say the same question with contractors too. How
yes,
do you even more so navigate so that
yes.
your design doesn't get completely changed on you?
Contractors are hard. They are real hard because they will just change stuff in the field, and you'll go on a site visit. You'll be like, wait a minute, what? This is not what was in the drawings. And they're like,
Right.
no, this is what had to happen. Well, you can't call me because you got my
Right.
cell phone number. So I've had to have very blunt conversations with contractors. Like, listen, my cell phone's on. I might be in a meeting. I might be in a design presentation, but you can leave a message and you can text me, because if something is urgent, don't just keep working and not contact me.
Yeah.
So I think the more that you contact and are in communication, like I said, with architects, everybody who's a stakeholder in the project. And that's why this job really becomes very tedious, because it's not just about putting together the pretty picture and walking away. Like, you have to follow up to make sure it's going to be executed in the way that it's supposed to, with contractors, with architects, with the client, because everybody is looking at it in a different perspective, and you've got different information for different people. So the client's looking to you to make sure everything's okay. They're looking to make sure that they still feel like they have ownership and stake in what's going on. Commercial clients are typically a little less involved than residential, but it just depends on the person, because sometimes small business owners want to be involved a lot too.
Right.
So I think it just depends, in making sure that you are communicating the right information to the right people. So the contractor doesn't care if we're on budget all the time. You know what I mean? Like, he just wants to know, am I doing what needs to be done? And is this right? Versus the client wants to know, like, are we still on budget? Are things exploding over here? Like, what's going on? So I think it's really important to make sure you're communicating the right things to the right people on the team, and everything is working out the way you need it to.
Right. Have you ever encountered where, because in most of the projects you work on, is the customer bringing on their contractor, or are you having to recommend someone that you've worked with in the past? How is that usually like?
It's both.
Mm-hmm.
So if a lot of times people will already have relationships with contractors and say, hey, he's giving me a good price, I'm working with him. I had a situation where I was doing a bathroom in a historic renovation, and I was trying to be very respectful of the time period that the client wanted to stay in. And the contractor was just like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be done. And me and him were like going at it. And I didn't want to get the homeowner involved, because I'm like trying to, it's like almost like you going to tell your mom that like my brother's with me. You know what I mean? So you're trying to like respectfully resolve it with the contractor, and he's just not doing it the way that it needs to be done. So then you have to figure out a way to politely tell the client, you know, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to respect what you have asked me to do, but the contractor is doing, you know, this, that, and the other. So it really depends on, you know, who it is, how the person relates to other people, because some contractors are very personable and then others are not. So it all just, it depends on the person.
Right. Right. I wonder if those dynamics happen more so when it's when it's not one that you refer versus when it's
somebody that I referred. I know how they work. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the hard things about residential design, because if I had the same contractor every client, my projects would be a lot smoother, because you know how the person works, you know what they utilize, what companies they work with, and how they install, because everybody's installation method is a little bit different, and you know that also affects what materials you select and all of that. So having to relearn that every time on a residential project is really difficult. And so on a commercial project, it's typically a little bit better, because there aren't as many commercial contractors as there are residential. So
right, that's true. So let's talk a little bit about purchasing and procurement, because I remember we talked a little bit about that briefly. And so do you say that a lot of your projects you do get into that automatically, or is it like some you do, some you don't?
It depends again on the client, and some clients want to procure on their own. They want to find the best deal, find the best prices, which is fine. And then other clients, they just want you to literally hand it over. And so it depends on the client and the project. And I've learned to just understand from the initial consultation what the client's comfortable. What do you actually want me for?
Right.
And sometimes it grows along the way where they get more comfortable with me and they're like, you know what, just handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to have those conversations up front and be like, what do you actually want me to do? And some clients don't necessarily have the words. They haven't worked with a designer. They don't really know what they want. I just recently had a residential client who, at our initial signing, they're like, you know what, we just want ideas. We just want concept boards. We want design boards. That's it. Because right now we're not ready to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So I go into the project with a totally different mindset. I'm not looking for things that I'm actually going to source. I'm just looking for great illustrations and images that are going to speak to their style, and what they're wanting to do. So then once I hand over the design boards, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Where can we buy it? Where can we get it?
You're like,
I don't even know your budget. Like, some of these fabrics are extremely expensive. Like, you know what I mean? So those are the kind of things that they don't know. They don't understand that. And so, I specifically told them, I was like, see, this is why at the beginning I asked you, do you actually want to buy things or you don't? Because I select different materials based off of that. So it's kind of a learning curve with certain people. And also just, you know, making sure that you are able to kind of educate clients on this is what this really means. And sometimes people just have to do it in order to get it. So.
Yeah. And so when you are having to procure the project and do the purchasing and everything, so what do you think are the challenges, and how do you recommend navigating that process?
Well, on a commercial side, the procurement is a lot more tedious because finding and sourcing companies that as a small business are going to allow you to purchase through them without like high minimums and stuff like that is really hard.
Right.
Especially when it comes to like small boutiques. I'm not going to purchase 1,000 chairs. I'm only going to purchase like 5. But they still need to be able to withstand high traffic and not be just a dining room chair. So a lot of that's where the hard part comes in, is to really find sources and really have kind of a Rolodex of companies that are going to allow you to purchase small quantities, but also they be commercial grade. So this was where I got a lot of help from like mentors, people who were commercial solo designers who I was like, where do you use? Where do you buy stuff? And they would just give me sources like, this company, you know, has really good commercial grade stuff. You can buy, you know, minimums from this company. But on a commercial side, it's really hard. And firms kind of have the up on this because they're doing projects where they can, you know, order 1,000 chairs and meet the minimum. So that's the hard thing about commercial work as far as sourcing.
Right. And so when you encounter customers who want to purchase themselves, that's usually, I would think, for your residential clients, right? And so
because commercial clients, they don't even know where to start unless it's I did a project for a cafe / bookstore in downtown Cleveland, and they ended up having connections or relationships with people who were able to get them some of their kitchen equipment at like a better bargain price. And it was so it was one of those things, having to educate them on, well, you really need to know who used it before, how long it was used, what quality and condition it's in before you just purchase used goods. So most commercial clients don't really want to get into that, especially if they don't have connections with that, because they're really looking to you for that.
Right. And so I've always thought of a purchasing agent because I never really wanted to get involved, but
it's tedious.
It's a lot
of work. It's a lot of work.
Right. But sometimes with the quantity, it's like, it might not be worth having a purchasing agent to handle it. And so, but so like, what has it been like for you working with a receiver? I remember us talking about that before, where they can actually make things more difficult depending on if they're not doing the process properly.
Right. So working with the receiver was beneficial for me because as a small solo designer, I don't have a full-time person who's receiving like packages and able to check product to make sure it's not broken and needs to be sent back and all of that. So there's a couple receivers here locally that I use where they do all of that, and you just pay them to do that. And it works to just be able to build that out with the product and factor it into your cost so that they're checking those products and they let you know, and they'll give you like a full list of all that comes in, when it comes in. If it's damaged, they'll send it back for you. You don't have to worry about any of that shipping and all of that. So that's important for me, being able to move forward and have those relationships and connections, even on residential clients and residential products. So the receiver is a huge benefit to a small business owner, in my opinion, having a good receiver.
Yeah, definitely. I think we covered all the questions that I wanted to ask, and I feel like we could keep talking about this forever. You have so much good information to share with us, Jakecia. But was there anything else that you wanted to mention about what we talked about that I didn't talk about?
No, I just think for small business owners and kind of like the target market that I usually try to cater to, you have to do a lot of educating and really understanding how to sell yourself, because a lot of times small business owners, they don't budget in design. Like, they're worried about getting equipment and making sure they can start up and all of that. And I think by those sales, skills come into play when you're able to say, this is why you need me, and helping them to understand the value of having a designer, why they need a designer, and why it's important, imperative for their business. So I think being able to sell your information, what you have, your services, your skills, is really critical in more of the commercial arena, especially when you're solo. Because a lot of the times with a firm, you can it speaks for itself. They have credentials, they have the backing to go behind them and to make sure that people feel comfortable. But when it's just you have to be able to provide that. So
Right. I agree. Yeah. But I mean, I really appreciate all the information you shared with us. And so,
no problem. It's
yes.
a continual journey, and I appreciate kind of the group that you're putting together, because I think being able to learn from each other and continue to share resources, especially when you're a small business. And I don't ever want to like grow my business past, getting to a large firm. That's not kind of what I see or envision for myself. So wanting to stay small, I need to be able to learn how to function and operate in this capacity. And I think by having relationships and a group of people that can help you to do that, that's important.
Definitely. And, I admire too that we're minorities. And so it's not something you see often in our industry to begin with, as well as commercial. So it's a pleasure to be able to have this interview with you as well. And I'm sure you'll be encouraging a lot of little brown girls like us. So
I hope so. It's funny because it was about 6 months ago, a lady had she emailed me and she was like, I was searching for, Black interior designers locally who like own their own companies, and I really wasn't finding anybody. And she was like, she's like, you're kind of like a unicorn.
That's hilarious.
I'm like, I guess you could put it that way, but it's like we're already only Black female interior designers are only like 6% of the industry already, and so understanding that even in your own individual city, your percentage is probably going to be even lower than that. So understanding that we kind of have to develop those relationships and, stick together to make sure that we're providing the visual that, yes, there's only 6% of us, but we're here and you can do this too, is really important.
Definitely.
Especially when people see people like us in the industry, it's just more appealing.
Right, I agree. So thank you so much. Our time is already like almost here, but we had so much to talk about and I appreciate it. But I would encourage everyone to, if they want to continue the conversation with Jakecia and I, you can find us in the Commercial Interior Design Club by YL Designs. And yeah, we'll see you there. So thank you again, Jakecia. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right.